Tonight, what we're going to hear is a story from a speaker whose life is a sketch of contrast and mystique. We're going to look at 3 topics tonight. We're going to divide his life up into 3 topics. First of all, we're going to look at his life as he was under the influence of his earthly father. And we're going to look at what that life was like. Then we're going to talk about his life under the influence of the Godfather, which is the Mafia, is what I'm referring to. And then thirdly, we're going to look at his life under the influence of God the Father. And we're going to break his life down into those 3 pieces. We started a little bit earlier tonight, earlier than last year, because we didn't want to get rushed. Last year we got a little bit rushed and we had to get our speaker to the plane, and we don't want to go through that again. So tonight we're going to relax and kind of let the story unfold. And all I need to ask you to do is please put your phones away, don't be distracted, and listen to the flow of what you're going to hear. You probably will never hear another story like the one that you're about to hear this evening. This is rare and unique. But before the speakers come up, would you turn your attention to the screen?
And then there was Pete the Killer, who was Sally Balls' brother.
I took care of that thing for you.
And you had Nicky Eyes.
What's up, guy?
And Mikey Franzese.
That guy, yeah, I want to see him.
Michael Franzese was not just a soldier, but a capo in the notorious Colombo crime family. He spent the better part of a decade in federal prison on charges including tax fraud, racketeering, and parole violation.
I grew up in New York where there are 5 organized crime families. My dad, Sonny Franzese, was the underboss of the Colombo family back in the 1960s. I went to see my dad in Leavenworth in the visiting room, and I said, "Dad, I'm not going to school anymore." And he said, "Okay, son, but if you're going to be on the street, then I want you on the street the right way." In his mind, the right way was to become a member of his life. He said, "Go home, somebody be in touch with you, do whatever you're told." That's how it started for me.
He was a made member of organized crime. His main forte was making money for the mob. In a very short period of time, he made over $1 billion for the Colombo organized crime family.
Yeah, by far the most lucrative business I got involved in was the wholesale gasoline business. And in a nutshell, we devised a way to collect the taxes, not pay the government the taxes. And I was there to be in business and to make money, real money.
Life magazine called him the mob's young genius.
The government calls him one of the biggest money earners in the history of organized crime.
Handsome and high-living young man, as rich as royalty, and royal he is, a prince of the Mafia.
Made millions, lived a flashy life, and came to be known as the Yuppie Don.
Did you fix any games in college?
Absolutely.
He says he doesn't have $14 million.
He doesn't. He has about $50 million.
How do you know that?
Because I personally delivered it to him.
I was notorious, infamous, maybe sophisticated at times, but I was a criminal. Eventually, you realize it's a life built on treachery, and that money and power are the driving forces. And I began to question the life and my commitment to the life at that time.
Making the most money for the mob since Al Capone, Michael was the youngest person listed on Fortune magazine's 50 most wealthy and powerful mob bosses. Now, as one of the only guys from that list still alive, Michael has transitioned from powerful mob boss to now speaking in front of thousands of people each week. A lot has changed these past 20 years, but it's safe to say that Michael Franzese is a man on a mission.
Let's extend a warm Life Imprint Dinner welcome to Michael and Cami Franzese.
Thank you.
Well, I've been studying your lives for the last several months, and I can't believe you're finally sitting in front of me.
We made it.
All right, we're glad you're here. And your brother is here?
Yes,
Kimmy, your
sir.
brother Dean is here, and we want to...
Oh, wow, there's a lot of people here.
Kimmy, you don't often accompany him, right? This is one of the first few times.
I do and I don't. When I have time, I come along with him.
Yes.
All right.
Well, I didn't realize she was speaking with me at this point, so I heard a lot about that before we got here down. And I don't prepare her properly, but she's a trooper.
All right, we're going to look forward to hearing from both of you. As we had lunch today, Michael, I commented to you, there's just so much to cover. And it seemed reasonable to me that the best way we could approach it would be to divide your life up into these 3 segments and just talk our way through these. And so I'm going to kind of pose some questions to you. You can follow up with those. And Kim, if you want to share perspective as he's talking, then you'll be welcome to do that. As I read your books, Michael, it did seem that your father played such a powerful role, shaping influence in your early life. Let's talk about John Sonny Franzese. What would you want us to know about him?
Well, first of all, I love my dad. Growing up, I idolized him. And, he was a great father to me, very supportive of me. I thought a good husband to my mother. And he was very family-orientated, but, he was the underboss of the Colombo family back in the 1960s, and that's a very powerful position. But aside from that, my dad was kind of the John Gotti of his day. Extremely high profile, always in the media, always a major target of law enforcement. So I grew up in that environment. And I grew up actually hating the police and hating law enforcement because I loved my dad, and I always saw them as the enemy, trying to, harass my father, disrupt our family. So I grew up in kind of that mentality. But he was great growing up. He didn't want this life for me originally. He wanted me to go to school, be a doctor. He would say, son, stay off the street, get an education. That's what it's all about. He wanted me to be a doctor. And so he kind of, pushed me in that direction. And, he was great. I always tell a story. I was an athlete in school. I played all 3 sports. And my dad would never miss a game, no matter what he was doing. Mob business, legit business. I'd be playing ball and he'd show up. And so baseball was really my sport. This happened all the time. I'll repeat it. I'd be playing ball, and I'd be looking for my dad. And I'm up to bat, and I look out of the corner of my eye, and here he comes. He'd drive up in a big black Cadillac or a black Lincoln. That's the car he drove. And he'd always come late, so he'd never go into the parking lot. He'd always pull right up to the field, And he gets out of the car, always dressed sharp in a suit. Dad never dressed any other way. Always had 5 or 6 guys with him. He never traveled alone. So he'd get out of the car, he'd walk onto the field, go into the stands. I'd be up to bat. I kid you not. Umpire takes one look at that crew, never called strike 3 on me when he saw Dad. I would say, hey, Pop, you're very good for my batting average. I played football. Nobody would tackle me when he was in the stands. So, he was really great. And like I said, he pushed me in the right direction. But, every other week he would be arrested. It would be all over the newspapers. We didn't have social media at that time, but I heard, a lot of issues in the schoolyard. Your dad's a Mafia dad. I would fight. It was that kind of environment. And, so that's how it was in my early childhood.
Okay. He was known as the Iceman. What did that mean?
Well, look, my dad was very charismatic. If you would write the typical or get the image of the typical gangster, that was my dad, dressed sharp. He just had that look and that way about him. And, allegedly, and I always say this, you ask and I'm honest about it, he was an enforcer, and as a result, a lot of bodies in his wake. So he had that reputation. And I saw that kind of, and I loved and respected him for it. I idolized him. I wanted to be like him. And, that's what he was alleged to be.
One of the comments in your book was that he was known as the Iceman because when he walked in the room, everybody's blood ran cold. Is that an accurate description?
Well, it wasn't me, but I guess everybody else. Yeah, I saw him, a few incidents that I witnessed when I saw people get pretty scared just being in his presence. And he didn't often do that in front of us, but once or twice, circumstances allowed, and people were scared.
Okay. All right, you were one of 7 children.
Yes.
Your father had 3 by an initial marriage.
Correct.
And you were your mother's first child.
Correct.
And then they were married, and then they had 3 more, so you were one of 7.
Correct.
Okay. But you were the only one in that family that was not one of his blood sons.
Yes, that's true.
Okay. And that perhaps played into your desire to please him so strongly, this powerful figure. Does that make sense?
Yeah, what formed my early life, and is my desire to please him all the time. Mm-hmm. Thinking that I was the only one that really wasn't a blood son, even though he was the only father I ever knew. And quite honestly, my mother, she was 16 when I was born. My dad got divorced, and his 3 children came into the house when my mother was 19 or 20. So she had an instant family, and she didn't take to that too well. And at times, she was not real nice to those other kids. So my fear was always, hey, maybe he's going to turn on me because I'm not one of his real children. But he never did. Never did. Always treated me as well or better than the others, And but that drove me to always try to please him. He wanted me to play ball. I want to be the best ball player. He wanted me to go to school. I got great marks. I had a little conduct problem in school, but other than that, I had good marks. And that drove me in my early life to please him. And quite honestly, he taught me be respectful of women, try to keep your word, do the right thing. So growing up, he taught me all the right things.
Mm-hmm. In your book, you mentioned playing this red rubber ball game at your grandparents' home. Can you describe that just briefly? I thought it humanized you in a great way.
Yeah, in the back of my grandmother's house, they had a chimney, and it was a brick chimney. Then it had a little kind of like a ledge, and then it went, how a chimney is, and it had cement on the bottom. So we used to play with a rubber ball. We'd play a game. Whoever got to 100 points win. If you get it off there and you catch it, it's 1 point. If you hit it off that ridge and you caught it on a fly, it was 5 points. So he and I were very competitive in that game. I never won because he cheated all the time. And
you say everybody cheats when you lose.
Well, my dad really did cheat. Well, no, because I have a son that cheats all the time.
He cheats too, because he always beats him. So whenever he loses, they cheat.
It happens to be true, but we used to really go hard at that game, and it was something that I'm realizing now, how important it was, because my sons and I play golf all the time. It's been great, but it really brought us even closer, and he used to antagonize me to beat him all the time.
All right, so it was pretty much under the wraps that he was in the Mafia, but then the article came out, The Hood in the Neighborhood, on Christmas Eve, and that sort of blew the cover.
Yes. It was a huge article in Newsday, which was the big publication on Long Island, The Hood in Your Neighborhood. And it was, I don't know how many pages with photos and everything else. And that kind of blew the lid, like you said, off everything. And, I had a graduation party when I graduated high school. And my dad put up a tent in the backyard. We had about 500 people there. A lot of my friends were invited. And everyone's car in the entire neighborhood, they took all the license plates, and maybe 3 or 4 weeks later, everybody started getting grand jury subpoenas. Now, even if my friend borrowed somebody's car, the person whose car they borrowed was caught to the grand jury. And they were asking questions, what were you doing at the party? So that kind of blew the lid off of everything at that point in time. But that's the kind of environment, we lived in.
Okay. And eventually he was indicted on bank robbery charges?
He was indicted in the 60s 3 times in the state of New York. Twice for grand larceny, once for homicide. And over that 3 or 4 year period, he went to trial on all 3 of those cases, and he was acquitted, found not guilty each time. 1966, they indict him in federal court for masterminding a nationwide string of bank robberies. Goes to trial. After a lengthy trial, he was convicted. And in 1967, they sentenced him to 50 years in prison. It was the longest sentence for a bank robbery conspiracy case ever given up to that point. 1970, he loses all his appeals, and they ship him off to Leavenworth Penitentiary to do his time.
All right, so Dad is now out of the home. He's in prison. How does that affect you?
Oh, it affected me tremendously because, I had a conversation with him. I went to see him in prison, and I said, Dad, bank robbery. And he looked at me, and, to that point, my dad never lied to me. And he said to me, son, I'm innocent of these charges. I'm not a bank robber. The government framed me. And that's all he had to say, and I believed him. And one of the things that really made me believe, my father throughout my childhood hated anything to do with drugs, hated it. He would make up stories like parables to show the evils of drugs. And as a result, until this very minute, I've never taken a drug, never smoked weed, nothing in my whole life, because he put that in my head, and other issues because of that. But so the alleged bank robbers were all drug addicts. So I knew my dad wouldn't have anything to do with them. So I said, but Dad, 50 years. And I was a pre-med student at Hofstra University. I was playing ball. And Joe Colombo, who was the boss of our family, he kind of took me under his wing. I got very close to him and a lot of my dad's friends. And they saying, Mike, what are you doing going to school? If you don't help your father out, he's going to die in prison. Because he was 50 when he went in. If he had 50 on top of that, he'd be dead. So I go to see him in Leavenworth, and I said, Dad, I'm not going to school anymore. If I don't help you out, you're going to die in here. And he was upset. He said, no, I don't want that for you. And we went back and forth, but I was a pretty headstrong kid. And he kind of threw his hands up, and he said, okay, but if you're going to be on the street, I want you on the street the right way. And in his mind, the right way was to become a member of his life. So, Dr. J, he just looked at me, and, I'm going to be honest, and I hope it's not offensive to anybody, but I'm being as honest as I can. He looked at me and he said, I want to ask you a question. It's very serious. And I said, what? He said, if you ever had to kill anybody, could you do it? And honestly, I was kind of taken back by that. But, I thought about it a minute, and I said, look, Dad, under the right circumstances, I think I can. So he looked at me and he said, that's the right answer. He said, go home. Somebody's going to be in touch with you. Just do whatever you're told. And that was it. And from that point, he proposed me for membership in the Life. When you come into that Life, you can't just go up to somebody, hey, I'd like to join. Okay. Somebody has to propose you and vouch for you and say you have what it takes to become a member. And in my case, it was my dad.
All right, so now what we're moving is into the second phase of your life, which is the Godfather phase.
Right.
So you're nominated to, or whatever the word is.
Proposed.
Proposed, okay.
Yeah.
By a friend of your father's, I think.
And, since my father wasn't there, he sent word out and proposed me, but then somebody else had to make the introduction. Yeah.
Okay. And so someone comes to you and I think set up a meeting with Tom DeBella?
Yeah, he was the boss at that time.
Okay. And what transpired in your meeting with Mr. DeBella?
Well, I sat with Tom, and he said, Mike, I got a message from your father. He says you want to become a member of that Life. Is that true? And I'll never forget, I said to him, yeah, if that's what my dad wants, that's what I want. And he looked at me and said, this isn't about your dad. I asked you if is that what you want? And I said, yes. He said, well, here's the deal. From now on, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, you're on call to serve this family, the Colombo family. That means if your mother is sick and dying and you're at her bedside and we call you to service, you leave your mother, you come and serve us. From now on, we're number one in your life before anything and everything. When and if we feel you deserve this privilege, this honor to become a member, we'll let you know. Okay. And that's how it started for me. And at that point, you're a recruit.
So the initiation or probation period lasts about a year? Can you talk
almost
about
2
that?
years, yeah.
Okay. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, when you're a recruit, you're on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and you have to basically do whatever you're told to do in their eyes to prove yourself worthy to become a member. And honestly, that could be very menial. There's a lot of discipline in that Life, a lot of authority, a lot of alleged respect. You had a meeting at 8 o'clock, you weren't there at 7:30, you were late. Can never be late in that Life. Drive the boss to a meeting, sit in the car 3, 4, 5 hours. God forbid you go out, get a newspaper, go to the restroom. He comes back, you're not in the car, you're in trouble. I know I did that once, and I paid the price. But a lot of stuff like that. And, honestly, that Life, it's very violent at times. And if you're part of the Life, you're part of the violence. And there's no escape. If anybody tells you differently, they either weren't a made member of that Life, or they're not being honest with you. It's part of the Life.
All right, so during that probationary period, you have to make your bones. Just what does that mean exactly?
Well, this is always very difficult. I got to be honest, I do a lot of interviews, and it's always very difficult for me to talk about this because I don't want to offend people, and I certainly don't wear it as a badge of honor. And I see other guys out there, and they're talking about it, like Sammy the Bull, and I don't mention names, but, they're talking about this with some amount of pride, and I find it very difficult to do that. But also in being honest is, if you're ordered to murder somebody within that Life, you have to do it. And if you don't, you're in trouble. And the thing was, during that time, for 20 years prior to the time that I got made, they had an expression that said the books were closed, meaning they weren't bringing any new guys into the family, into any of the families. It was kind of a security thing. The only time you were allowed to bring somebody in is if somebody died and you replaced them. But in the early 70s, they opened the books because they wanted to build up the ranks. So what I told people is, in that life, it's not like you run around just committing murder and you're not killing everybody that you see. So there isn't enough people to go around that had to be killed. So, but you had to be prepared to do that if you were called on to do it. Okay. And they had to believe that you had that ability. And that's kind of the way it was during my time.
All right, so Halloween night, 1975, you get a call saying, tonight's your night. Tell us what happened from there.
You're never supposed to know when that night is, because obviously that has to be a very secretive thing. We were always being surveilled by the government, so nobody knew the night that you were going to be called. Could have been any time. And so it happened to be Halloween night when I got a call from my capo-regime, my captain at the time, and he said, I need to see you tonight in Brooklyn. He said, wear a suit. So I got dressed, and you're anticipating it, but I heard that call 100 times and nothing happened. And that was the night it happened. Joe Colombo's son, Anthony Colombo, had a catering hall in Brooklyn, and that's where this event took place for me. And it was late at night. Do you want me to describe the?
Yes, please.
There was 6 of us that were inducted that night, and we walked into a room individually. The boss was seated at the head of like a horseshoe configuration. Underboss Consigliere to his left and right, and all the captains, capo-regimes, were alongside of them. We had about 15 in our family at that point. And I walked down the aisle, stood in front of the boss, held out my hand. He took a knife right here, cut my finger, some blood dropped on the floor. This is a blood oath. And I cupped my hands. He took a picture of a saint, a Catholic altar card, put it in my hands, lit it aflame. Didn't hurt, it burned quickly, it was merely symbolic. And he said something to me that night that I don't recall ever hearing in my life before. And I grew up as a Catholic. I went to Catholic school from kindergarten right through high school. But for some reason, for me, Catholicism was like a subject in school. And I'm certainly not blaming Catholics. I mean, my family is Catholic. I do a lot with the faith. But it just didn't work for me at that point. And he said, tonight, Michael Franzese, you are born again into a new life, into La Cosa Nostra. Violate what you know about this life, betray your brothers, and you will die and burn in hell like this saint is burning in your hands. He said, do you accept? And I said, yes, I do. And that's the oath. The other 5 guys went in. They all took the oath. You come into the life. You come in as a soldier. And for me, I was motivated to do 2 things. Number 1, I wanted to get my dad out of prison, and I did end up getting him out on parole after 10 years. And he kept going back after that, but I did get him out. And went back 5 times, but that's another whole story. But and then I wanted to make money. My dad said in this life, you make money, it translates into power, not unlike the real world. And again, pleasing my dad, wanting to be the best possible mob guy I could be, I was fortunate that I knew how to use that life to benefit me in business. I was very aggressive on the street. I brought some things into the family that hadn't been done before and made, a significant amount of money. But, the funny thing, Dr. J, after we take the oath, we do what Italians do all the time. We had a banquet. We went and eat, right in the other side of the catering hall. We had a big banquet. And I'll never forget this little guy, Giorgio Vaitaco. He was a soldier. He comes in with a brown paper bag, and he says, hey, boss, should I give them all their bag of money now? The irony in that statement is everybody thinks you come into that life and people are throwing money at you. It's just the opposite. You come into that life, you got to prove yourself, and you're always paying up to the boss. And if you're an earner, you have a certain level. If you're not, you have a certain level. So, I learned it that day because the boss said, hey, don't expect us to do anything for you. You guys got to earn yourselves over here and earn your keep. Okay. And so it was a good lesson for me early on.
All right, let's briefly touch on this, and then we'll move on to the story. There's certain rules that go with the Mafia.
Yes.
Only Italians. Okay? The oath, absolute priority. Once you commit yourself to that, you've surrendered your life to that.
That's
oath.
it.
Okay. No grace. Any violation, the blood may get spilled like your finger was pricked. That was the symbolism.
You're told, and I want people to understand this, because a lot of people, like, Mike, how did you do that? When you come into that life, you're told, look, this is the deal. You play by the rules. You don't violate the oath. You don't make any mistakes. If you do, You can pay for it with your life. And it might be your best friend that walks you into that room that you won't walk out of. So we all have an understanding that we have to play by the rules. And if we violate, we can pay, the consequences could be severe. So we understand that going in. I'm not saying it's right to accept something like that, but that's the mentality you have when you're going in.
And that's the sense in which you surrendered your life to the Godfather. You were now under that influence.
Yes.
It defined your life in so many ways. Keeping confidential all family rituals and secrets. You're not
Yes.
supposed to talk about it. That's
Not
the
allowed to
mystique
talk
of the Mafia.
That's the oath of omerta that we take. You're not allowed to talk about it.
All right, you not violate another man's wife, sister, or daughter.
That's a ironclad rule. You know, when I came into the life, they said, Mike, don't ever worry about your wife, your sister, your mother, your daughter. Nobody will ever do that. And if you ever violate something like that, you're in trouble.
Okay. Never raise your hand against another member?
Never.
Never. Pay your dues to the boss unquestionably?
Yes.
Follow orders unquestionably?
Yes.
Okay. And no involvement with narcotics?
At that time, we were told straight out if we dealt with drugs, we died.
Has that changed?
I believe so. You know, with the younger guys, unfortunately, I saw guys that did mess with drugs during that time, and they paid the consequences for that. But, you know, for me, I hated anything to do with drugs anyways.
All right, so at age 24,
Yeah.
you enter into the Mafia. Now, you were hoping for business connections and the opportunities to make money to try to get your dad out of prison.
Yes.
And you were not disappointed.
No.
Business opportunities began to present themselves, and
Yes.
you took advantage of them. Talk about that a little bit, please.
Well, again, you know, I knew how to use that life to benefit me in ways. And, you know, I don't want to get into all the various businesses I had, but a couple of things that I did. Look, every mob guy is in some way involved with gambling. You know, at the height of my operation, I had 12 or 13 bookmakers that answered to me. And for those of you that don't know, a bookmaker takes bets illegally on the street. And if you're a bookmaker in New York or in most of the big cities, Youngstown, Ohio, Kansas City, you can't operate without the mob because, number one, we wouldn't let you. What are you going to do, run to the police? You're a bookmaker. You know. Secondly, you know, a lot of times we would finance them. And thirdly, bookmakers give you credit. So sometimes, you know, a guy loses, you don't want to pay. Well, we were pretty good at collecting money at that time. So, you know, they wanted to be involved with us. So I had a number of bookmakers working for me. Everybody was involved in gambling. Mob guys like to gamble. It wasn't a habit that I had, but a lot of guys do. And then we always had money out on the street if we had money, Shylock money. And we used to lend it out at, you know, usurious rates. You don't go to a bank, you come to us, but you got to pay. That's it. You know, you don't get away with it. So, you know, I was definitely involved in that. Most of the money that I lent was either to business people or to my own crew so that they can go out and earn some money. I would lend it to them at 1% a week, and they would go out and lend it to somebody else. I had the worst time collecting from my own guys than I did from business. But,
you got involved with influencing some professional sports games.
Yes. Well, we had a lot of professional athletes gambling with us. And, you know, back then in the 80s, I would have a bookmaker come to me, just to give you an example, Michael so-and-so from the Yankees, you know, I don't want to name names. You know, he's into us for 50 grand. Should we cut him off? And I said, why would you cut him off? You're taking an entry on a piece of paper. Let him get into you for 250 grand because they're always going to lose, and then bring him to me, and we'll tell you how he's going to resolve it. So it was that kind of a thing. And unfortunately, athletes, it's an extension of their competitiveness. They love to gamble, and for some reason, in my experience, they're horrible gamblers. They gamble out of emotion. They're horrible. And so we had a lot of them on both the you know, professional and college level gambling with us.
All right, let's talk about the gasoline business you got into. Describe that, because that seemed to be the big, giant moneymaker.
Yeah. Well, I had a number of things. You know, I had 2 automobile dealerships. I had a leasing company. I had a number of restaurants that I got involved in. And, you know, doing a lot of things. And then, you know, people have this idea that mob guys sit in their social clubs and they think of what business they're going to target. It's not like that. I mean, we were involved in unions. You know, I had a couple of unions that I controlled. I'll tell you, this might scare you off a little bit, but I controlled the security guards union. And that security guards, well, the security guards, we had 9 nuclear power plants around the country that I was in control of the security of. Now, I love my country, so nothing would ever happen, I tell you. And I don't know if you know this, but if you have a nuclear power plant, after it closes, you have to have security there for 100 years. 100 years. So that's a good business. But There's nothing to do but sit there. But anyway, so I had a number of unions under my control. But, you know, one day I used to have a place on Monday night. I'd call it Mondays. Wasn't very, you know, creative with that. But if somebody wanted to approach me with a business, they would come there on a Monday night and talk to me. So guy comes to me that had a small gasoline operation out in Suffolk County, Long Island. He tells me, Mike, there's two guys from another family that are shaking me down. They're trying to extort me. I was kind of the guy on Long Island. He said, I'd love to make you my partner, help me out, and so on and so forth. And I didn't like the guy too much. Just so he was 6'5", almost 500 pounds. Big guy. But he was big. He wasn't like slouch, he was big. But I just didn't take to him right away. And I said, well, I'll get back to you. Well, he kept coming back to me, Then one day he says, look, I think I have a method of possibly defrauding the government out of tax. Well, I didn't like the government. Okay, I want to hear that. So he tells me about it, and he kind of gets my attention. I said, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to start a new company, because I don't know if you owe any obligations to anybody. I want to be involved in that. We'll start a new company, and let's see what we can do. So he had a couple of gas stations on Long Island. I had a guy around me by the name of Vinny Aspromonte. He was my butcher. He was a big guy, he had a big scar across the top of his head, an imposing-looking guy. So I said, Vinny, I'm going to put you with this guy, Larry. Make sure he does the right thing. Let's see what he's got. So about 2 weeks later, Saturday morning, Vinny used to come to my house to bring me meat, you know, a butcher. So he comes on a Saturday, and he's got a big carton on his shoulder. And I said, what are we going to do with all this meat? I'm having a party, I don't know about it. And he says, hey, Chief, it ain't meat. He's coming to the kitchen. We go into the kitchen, he puts the box down on a table, and he opens it up, and he said, this is the first 2 weeks' take in the gas business, $320,000. It smelled like gasoline. I didn't care what it smelled like at that point, right? Well, he got my attention at that point, and over an 8-year period of time, we grew that 320 into about $8 million a week. And I had 350 gas stations. I had 18 companies that were licensed to collect tax on every gallon of gasoline. And we had, you know, I had a major operation because I brought all the Russian mob guys from Brighton Beach, Brooklyn, were partners with me, and we just exploded.
And this is, you're in your early 30s doing this, making this kind of money.
Yeah, it was late 70s when I started, right up through 85.
And there were instances you mentioned in your books that while all this is happening, you're making all this money, deep down inside, you're bothered by some of what you see. The toast to one of your soldiers that was taken out, and the words came to mind while you're toasting to one of your friends that was taken out, that, Michael, we're all sick. We're just all sick. Occasionally, these things would kind of flood through your mind. How did you deal with that when it rolled over you like that?
You know, and try to understand this. I'm not making excuses for anything, but, you know, that's a tough life. And when you were called upon to do certain things, I did things that I honestly was not comfortable with. I wouldn't let anybody know that because you can't reveal a weakness in that life. You just cannot. But I wasn't comfortable. But I don't know if I stepped out of myself and I did it anyway, but it just was bothersome to me. And I saw guys that at least outwardly seemed to enjoy that and seemed to really get into that. And that was bothersome to me a little bit because I said, you know, this is not pleasant stuff. How do you enjoy it? But, you know, I put on the image I was supposed to put on and I moved forward with it. But it's something that bothered me really the whole time because, you know what, I never aspired to be a mob guy. If you would ask me when I was what I wanted to be, I wanted to play center field for the New York Yankees. Mickey Mantle was my idol, you know, aside from my dad. It wasn't like I wanted to be in that life. I really didn't. I had no desire whatsoever. It just came about the way I described it as that circumstance because I love my dad. But things were troubling to me.
So being under the Godfather and all that influence, there were times where you had weaker moments and it really gouged your conscience, but you just kept going, kept soldiering.
Kept going, and one of the things that really bothered me, a very dear friend of mine who I loved, and, you know, I think you mentioned is Champagne Larry. He liked Dom Perignon, so we called him Champagne Larry, but he got killed, and I thought it was very unjust. And it was very, very troublesome to me because I baptized his kids and I was very close to him. And you know, he was involved with my sister. I'll tell you what happened just briefly. He was having an affair with my sister, and I didn't know it, and he was married. And people found out about it, and they brought me in. And I couldn't believe it. I was like shocked. But you just can't do that. Mm-hmm. And I tried talking. I said, look, he's not a made guy. He's a guy, he's an associate, but he's not a made guy. My sister's not married. You know, I tried to, but they weren't having it, you know, and so that hurt.
Okay.
That really hurt.
All right, in 1983, major development happens behind the scenes. You don't know anything about it. Representatives from 11 separate state, county, and federal law enforcement agencies march into the basement of the federal courthouse on Long Island, and they're going to hold 3-day-long intensive meetings, and their purpose is to get you.
Yeah. I
And
mean,
you
I
don't
didn't
know anything
know
about this.
I didn't know anything at the time. I found out that they had an 11-agency task force comprised of feds and state people whose total mission was to put me in prison.
To bring you down.
Yeah.
You sensed it, and along that time you decided to move your base of operations out of Brooklyn.
Yes.
You went to Southern California and in Southern Florida, and you got into the movie business.
Yes.
I want you to just summarize that briefly to bring us up to the point where you met Miss Keamy.
Quick, I got a million stories, but I don't want to keep you here all night, just because everything happens with a story behind it. But I had a friend of mine who, long story short, got himself in some real trouble. And it took everything in me to save his life, because he did something that was horrible. And I was up against an old-timer from another family who really wanted to hurt this guy. And I had to go way out of my way to save his life. And the old-timer at the time really resented me because I was one of the younger guys, but I won the argument, and he was okay. But I said to him, look, this guy was so upset. If you happen to be walking down the street and a car plows into you or a safe falls on your head, we're not going to know where it came from. You have a brother out in California, go out and stay with your brother for a while. Go sell cars out there. So he goes. He was out there about 2 months, and he calls me up, and he said, boss, we're going to be in the movie business. I said, what do you know about movies? He says, oh, don't worry, it's easy. You know, I got a script. We're going to get a director, an actor. He says, it's $250,000. He says, send me $83,000. You're my partner. I said, okay. Like a fool, I sent him $83,000. So we make this movie called Mausoleum, which is now a cult movie. They just put it out on Netflix. I couldn't believe it. I was watching it. So, P.S.
So bad.
$1 million later, we make this horror movie that didn't scare anybody but me, right? And so now I'm in the movie business. I said, well, how am I going to get my money out of this? So now I start to get involved, and I buy into a distribution company and all this kind of, and I'm making movies for a couple of years, you know, financing them and having some fun with it. We're making money, actually. So Smokey Robinson and another friend, Leon Isaac Kennedy, come to me with a screenplay for a breakdance movie. It was in 1983. A lot of music, a dance, a lot of rap music. But that's when you can listen to rap music on the radio. Not like today. Forget about today. But back then it was great. And so we film it in Southern Florida, and we bring cast and crew from LA to work in the film, and 50 or so professional dancers. And we have them all staying in a hotel in South Florida called the Marina Bay Club. It's Fort Lauderdale, right? Lauderdale, yeah. And lo and behold, there's one of the dancers.
Okay, so you see her one day, and you're hit by the
I should have ran
thunderbolt.
faster.
All right, now let me. I want you to understand that my version of this is the right one. She always disputes this, but this is it. Okay, I'm sitting by. I threw a big party for everybody. We had done pre-production, and it was we were getting ready to start principal photography on a Monday. Sunday, I throw a party for everybody in the back of the hotel. Big barbecue. Everybody's having a great, beautiful day in Florida, and I'm sitting by the pool, and I'm talking to a couple of guys and minding my own business, and she comes out of the water, and I'm telling you, it was like a Pepsi commercial. Everything went in slow motion. And she just blew me away. So I asked the choreographer, I said, is that one of our dancers? He said, yeah, because I hadn't seen her yet. And I said, bring her over. I want to meet her. You know, she'll want to meet me. Why not? So I introduced myself to her. She says her name is Camille. I said, look, I want to get to know you better. I'm your producer. I want to take you to lunch. She says, sure, sweet, polite, right? So we set a time and a place, and I got one of these restaurants set up on one of the hotels, you know, a guy I knew. I had everything going but the violins. I figured she'd come up there, sweep her off her feet, she's mine. So I'm up there for about, that was my attitude back then, I'm up there about 45 minutes. She stood me up. She never showed up. So I see her the next day on the set.
I never said I would be there.
She said, I'll meet. Why would I go through all that trouble if she wasn't going to come?
I have no idea why, but I never said I would be there.
Trust me, my version is the correct version. No. So now I see her on the set the next day, and I said, hey, what happened? We had a date. You didn't show up. So I figured she was going to say, oh, I'm sorry. You know, she says, well, I was busy. I said, oh. I said, what were you doing? She said, well, I had to rehearse. I said, okay. She says, you know, and then I said, could we try it again? She says, yes. I said, another time and a place. No, why would I make this up? I said, another time and a She stood me up again. Now, I'm telling you, Dr. G, she stood me up 5 times. She kept saying yes, and she would never show up.
I never said yes. I said maybe. I said I'll try. I said I'm busy.
I'll try means you're coming.
He thought that meant yes, I'm going to be there.
Yes.
That was his
But what did she
problem.
have to do? She was rehearsing for me. She was able to show up. No.
Maybe I just didn't want to go.
Anyhow.
Okay, let me ask her a couple of questions. How did you get to Fort Lauderdale?
I belong to a dance company called The Dancing Machine, and those were the dancers who were hired to be in the film. But I wasn't initially, because I was one of the younger dancers, and I came along kind of late, and I wasn't as trained as the rest of the dancers. So Jeff Kutash, who was the director, he took a liking to me, and he said, you have potential, but I need you to, work and train with the dancers. So I actually wasn't cast as one of the dancers to go be in the film. But a friend of mine who lived in Florida said, hey, your dance company's here and they're dancing, but I have this club here in Miami and they're looking for dancers, and I told them about you and this guy wants to hire you. So I just said, I just want to get out of Anaheim for a while and do something. So my father was all for it. My mother was like, absolutely not, you're not going anywhere. But somehow I got there, they sent me a ticket. And then we just went over to the set, and Jeff was like so surprised to see me. He's like, what are you doing here? And I gave him the whole story. And then just so happened, one of the dancers that they had left to go do something else here in LA, and I just kind of stepped right into it. So
how old were you?
It was a blessing and a curse.
And you were how old?
I was just turned 20.
Just turned 20.
Yes.
Okay. And you grew up in a family. You were the oldest of 7.
I am, yes.
And your mother was the pillar.
She was.
And she was a woman of faith.
A very strong woman of faith, yes.
And she had introduced you to the idea of a relationship with God in your teen years.
At 13, yes.
Okay. And that's when you felt like you made your connection with God.
Yes.
Okay.
That is definitely when I made my connection with God. Is when Elvis Presley had died. And I had come to the realization of if the king, Elvis Presley, could die so young.
It's my competition.
That was his major competition. It just left me just, bewildered, like, how can that be? And then I started to think about death and what's going to happen to me when I die. And that's when I became a young girl of faith.
Okay.
I gave my life to Jesus Christ at 13.
Okay. So he is struck with the thunderbolt, in his breath is taken away. What was your reaction the first couple of times you met him?
Nothing.
True.
I thought he was nice, but I don't know. Just like, we're married 35 years later, so don't get like your feelings hurt. But to me, it was just like he was just an older man. He was just old. I mean, he was only 32, but that was like, oh my God.
I was 31. I was 31.
31, sorry, you were going to turn 32.
Yes.
I don't know. I mean, it wasn't even a thought in my head. But the crazy thing is that all of the dancers that I was dancing with, they were just all enamored with him. They're, he's so this and so that. So I kind of played with it because I thought, they all like him, but he actually likes me. Let me just go with it for a while and have a little fun, And then here I am, 35 years later.
Well, yeah, but she's not telling you what happened. So finally...
He's insulted. So he's
no. I'm literally chasing her. She didn't want to have anything to do with me. I knew that. But one night we're having a cast meeting.
Oh, yeah.
And she comes out of the meeting. It's about 9:30 at night, and she was upset. Something was wrong. She was one or two of her friends. I don't know if you remember. And I said, this is great. Tailor-made for me. I got to fire somebody. I'm going to be her hero now, right? So she tells me she's from Anaheim, California, and she used to dance in Disneyland, Knott's Berry Farm, and she says, Mike, I need to go home. And I said, why? She said, well, my parents are very strict, and this is 3,000 miles away. I've never been away this before. I'm 20 years old. and they want me to come home. And she said, there's some things happening on this movie set that I don't agree with. And I'm saying, you know, it was a wild set, music, dance, young kids, you know, it got a little crazy at times. But I'm saying to myself, well, you're a dancer. What's the big deal?
Insulting.
Well, I didn't mean it in that way, but you know what I mean. You're a dancer. All the other dancers were partying with us, and you weren't partying. So, you know, so we used to go out to some of the clubs, but she would never show up, you know, because I was always looking for her. But so I said, well, what's the problem with that? What's the big deal? And I forget how you put it. She said, well, I'm a girl of faith, or I'm a believer, or a Christian. I said, well, I'm Catholic. We got something in common. Let's talk, right? You know, so we get to know each other a little bit on the set, and, you know, she starts to like me a little bit. We wrap the movie. She says, you got to come home and meet my mother. She's very close with her mom. So I said, I'm great.
If you meet my mom and she likes you, maybe you got a chance.
Yeah, so I said, I'm great with moms. Let's go, right? So we jump on a plane and we go to meet her mom. I got to tell you, her mom, Irma, was the most godly woman. You meet Irma for 2 minutes, your name goes in she had a prayer book like a telephone book. I'm not kidding. And I'll never forget this. We're sitting, I know her about a week. We're sitting down at a table in her mom's kitchen, and her mom looks at me and she says, where are you with your faith? I said, well, what do you mean? You know, I'm a Catholic. She says, well, where are you with that? And I said, well, I'm a Catholic. I don't know. I believe in God. I didn't know what to answer her. So she looks at me, Dr. J, my hand to the Lord, she said, I have a feeling one day you're going to be preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ to millions of people. Out of nowhere like that. You remember you said, she says, Ma, please don't scare him away. I'm hoping... She said, yeah, you must have done that with all the guys. She said, I'm hoping for a Bible service, a Bible study on Wednesday or service on Sunday. That was her answer. And her mom looked at her, because I thought her mom was nuts at that point. Her mom looked at her and said, why would you ever limit the power of Jesus Christ in anybody's life?
Yeah.
And she said at that point, I'm putting his name in my prayer book.
You went to the very top.
Went to the right top of her prayer book. That was more protecting you, I think, than me.
So, yeah.
But honestly, at that point, I thought she was out of her mind.
Okay,
I
so
didn't pay any
things are starting to
attention.
move.
Yeah.
And right about this time, though, the movie's over. You got to go back to California, and your business empire starts. Y'all are coming together, but the businesses start to fall apart. And they're on your trail, and you start to hear that they're going to indict you, I think. And you're arrested in Kennedy Airport after you'd flown out to California and see the family?
You know, Dr. J, for a period of about 4 or 5 weeks, they arrested me every Friday on another case. I mean, they just came down like a ton of bricks on me.
Okay.
Giuliani indicted me on a big case. Eastern District of New York indicted me. I got indicted in New York again. They just kept hitting me one after the other.
Okay.
And honestly, I kept beating them one after the other.
Yeah, these are all charges you were able to get past.
Yeah.
Okay, and once you were able to get past all those, Kimmy, you're starting to realize there's some things going on here in his life. But you go to California and you propose marriage to the family.
Well, what happened was I wanted to marry her. I knew that. I mean, that was it for me. And, but I realized I had all these cases. And, you know, you got to understand, I don't know if you realize this, but on these racketeering indictments that they were handing down on us, you don't go away for 10 years or 5 years. They were giving us 50s and 100s. And, you know, some of my friends were going to trial. They were getting convicted. They were getting 70, 80 years, 100 years. Under the new law, there's no parole. You're doing 85% of your time. That's it. So I said, man, I'm the youngest guy at all of these guys. They're going to give me 200, 300 years because I've beat them so many times. So I was starting to realize that. When we were going out strong and Giuliani indicted me on a major case, and I was the lead defendant, I had 15 co-defendants. And Giuliani told me in the courtroom, he said, Michael, he didn't say, he said, Franzese, if I convict you on this, you're going to get double what your father got. I'm giving you 100 years. Yeah. So now I'm with her, and I'm saying, how am I going to marry her and then go away for the rest of my life? She's 21 years old. Yeah. So I knew I had to fight that case, and she'll tell you, she practically didn't see me. I fought day and night. I hired a team of investigators. I had my lawyer. I was on trial 7 months in federal court, and I was acquitted in that case. Some of my co-defendants were convicted. They got 30 years. So I would have got at least 50, 100%. So I beat the case on a Friday. I came back. She was with her mom in New York. I said, pack up. We're going to Vegas. We're getting married tomorrow. And so, and her mother was happy, you know.
That was her idea.
It was her idea. She said, when are you going to, I said, tell me when. She says, right away. I said, let's go, pack up, we're going, right? So we go get married in this chapel in Vegas. And then, you know, we had a big wedding in July after that with family and all that stuff. But
well, let's talk about the conversation. Before you had the wedding in the church, you met the pastor. Y'all had to go for counseling.
yes.
And that's when you started to have spiritual conversations and you asked to speak to him privately. Remember talking to the pastor?
Yeah, we were in Westwood, California. We were staying at the Westwood Marquis, I was anyway, and across the street there's this beautiful church, Westwood Hills Christian Church. So I said, Cam, you want to get married there? No, I didn't care. Church, Christians want to get married, just pick your church. And because honestly, I wasn't buying into anything at that point. So we go speak to Pastor Dr. Myron Taylor, a gentleman, you know, an elderly fellow at that time. And as we're talking about it, I can't explain it. Something just struck me with this man. And I asked her, I said, Cam, could you leave for a second? I want to talk to Dr. Taylor privately.
And he's talking to you about where you are in your relationship with God, right?
Well, at that moment, he didn't know anything.
Yeah.
But I sat in the room with him and I said, Doc, I got to tell you something. I said, my future wife, my mother-in-law, they're talking to me about Jesus and forgiveness of sins and all that. Let me tell you a little bit about who I am and my past. And so I started to open up to him a little bit. Never had done that before. And the way he reacted to that was just so comforting. I can't explain it. And I felt such a confidence with this man that he was the one that really started to make me think, well, maybe there's something to this. Because honestly, at that point, forgive me, I mean, you know, I'm a mob guy. I mean, this was my life, you know, and I didn't think about my salvation or anything like that, honestly. But things started to churn in me at that point in time, really.
And in that conversation with him, he quoted John 3:16.
He quoted John 3:16, and he really talked to me about Paul. Mm-hmm. And, you know, led me really understand what that life was all about and that transformation and transition. And, of course, that's comforting to somebody like me, but still, you know, I got to try to explain it. You know, I had this mob mentality. You know, the mob is not a business. It's a way of life. And so you have to be in it all the way or you don't survive. So it's who I was from the inside out. And so it was very hard for anything else to penetrate. Because, you know, not only was I in it for that amount of years, but I grew up in it with my dad. So it's who I was. And but it started the wheels to turn on me. It started to make me think. You know, and again, I wasn't buying into everything right away, but he started to have a little bit of an impact on me.
But it took him 10 to 12 years to actually be okay with grace and forgiveness, and that he was forgiven, and that God's mercy was for him too. I think that was the hard thing for Mike, because he couldn't accept that. So baptism helped because it was a ritual for him. You dunk him in water, and that made him feel, you know.
Yeah, when he suggested baptism, I related that to the ceremony. It's ritualistic. It's something I can understand. It's having an impact that I can visibly feel and see, and maybe I need that. And so I approach baptism that way.
Well, in your conversation with the pastor that day before y'all got married, you started to connect the dots that who Jesus was, what he came to do, and that maybe that could apply to you. Mm-hmm. You might be eligible for the benefits of a relationship with God through Jesus, in that he died on a cross for your sins, and you begin to understand the concept that maybe you could be forgiven. Forgiveness seemed to come into focus in that conversation. Am I reading that right?
That's correct.
Okay. All right. So that day you ask him, how do I enter into a relationship with God? And he explained to you a simple matter of praying, which you did. And that seemed to represent a step you took in the direction of God.
Yes.
And then after you get married, you have a child, and then you're indicted again.
Yes.
And this time you decide you're not going to fight it, but you want to get out.
Yeah,
and you copped a plea deal, and tell us a little bit about that.
I realized at that point that they were never going to let me go. And if I were to stay in that life, and remember, any time that I were to be convicted, I'm gone forever. I realized that I had reached that point where they weren't going to accept anything less than that. And I'm watching my friends get crazy sentences. So I said, I have leverage with the government. Why? Because I beat them on the Giuliani case. And my partner in the gas business, the big guy, he had turned informant. And he testified against me in the Giuliani case, and we destroyed him on the witness stand. So their major witness against me was now damaged. So I told my lawyer, I said, look, I said, I'm going to take a plea. I said, here's my plan. I said, I want to wrap everything up that might be pending on me. I said, they really want a conviction on me. I beat them now 5 times. And every time was media, a lot of media attention. They kept losing. So I said, I'll take a plea. I'll pay them back some money. I had a jet plane. I had a helicopter. I had a number of pieces of property. I said, I'll give them those things as part of my plea agreement. I'll do some time. I'll marry Camille. When I get out of jail, I'll have parole and probation. I can use that as an excuse not to meet up with the guys in New York, because when you're on parole, you can't meet with anybody. It's a violation. I said, maybe after 10 or 12 years, they'll forget about me. I'll live happily ever after out in California with Camille. That was my plan. So I took a plea. I had a 10-year prison sentence. I was under the old law, meaning that I was still eligible for parole. The law changed in '85, but I was under the old law. I gave up plane, helicopter, the whole bit. They gave me a $15 million restitution. I had $5 million more in forfeitures. And that was it. I wrapped everything up. And I had immunity against anything that had been done in the past except for murder. But I wasn't worried about them getting a murder conviction on me. So, and that was it. So I said, okay, I'll marry her. I can do a couple of years in prison. I'll negotiate to get into a prison out in California so she can visit me. I'll try to stay in touch with the family as best I can, and we'll get through this. Because, you know, I wasn't afraid of prison. I mean, I visited my dad since I was a kid. I knew at some point in time I was going to do jail time. So it wasn't that worried me. I said, let me get it over with. And that's what happened. But, you know, spiritually, I accepted Christ. But quite honestly, it was more self-serving. Because my mother-in-law used to tell me, you got to surrender your life to Jesus. I couldn't process that. I said, what do you mean surrender? I'm a mob guy. God helps those who help themselves. I couldn't process that. So yeah, I want my sins forgiven, but surrender, I couldn't get it. So I had one foot in and one foot out. It was very self-serving for me. And then the distraction for me was that I'm still on the street. I still have that mob mentality. Okay, I'm not going to get arrested anymore, and I'm going to try to do things the right way, but I can't explain. It wasn't real. Even though I was trying to make myself think it was real, and I was going to church with her on a Sunday, but you know, it's not a game. And I was kind of playing it on myself without really thinking that I was, and if I'm describing it right.
Then you lost.
Yeah, and then
November 13th.
What happened was I'm in prison. Life magazine, they had done a huge story on my dad. It was the biggest story ever in Life magazine. It was 29 pages with pictures and everything else. Well, their anniversary edition, they were doing one on me. So the warden calls me up when I'm out in Terminal Island. He says, Franzese, they're doing this big story. The Life magazine guy says, it'll be better if you participate. So me always thinking, you know, I can handle stuff. I said, let me talk to this guy. Maybe he'll give me a better story, because I'm trying to make peace with the government. I don't want to get anybody on the street upset. So I sit down with the guy, and I standard mob stuff. Hey, there is no mafia. I married this girl. I moved out to the West Coast. I'm tired of the government. I'm going to live my life out there. Standard stuff, right? About 3 weeks later, the warden calls me in. I'll never forget. He calls me back in. He says, Franzese, have you got a death wish? I said, what are you talking about? He shows me the article. Oh, my gosh. Huge article in Life magazine, big double page, big picture of me, and across the top, quitting the Mafia. And he had me almost testifying against everybody in New York. It was total fabrication. But the warden said, I got to lock you down. You're in trouble. We got word from the FBI. It's all over the street. They're informants. You know, Persico put a hit on you. It's done. And we got to lock you down. The FBI comes in to see me. Franzese, it's all over the street. You know, we'll put you in the program. We'll protect your life and that of your families. Now, I didn't want to do that. I wasn't mad at anybody. I wasn't going to testify against anybody. And I would never dishonor my dad to that point. No way. I said, I'm not doing that. And I had a tough couple of years in prison as a result. They kept locking me down. It was just a mess. We get out. I get out. We survived that. I'm on parole. Quite honestly, worst 13 months of my life. You know, big shot mob guy, made all this money on the street. I couldn't get anything going in LA. I was like a fish out of water. We couldn't put a house in our name, no utilities. The FBI coming to me, Franzese, you got to leave town. We had to pack up and leave. There was guys out there that were looking to kill me because you can't walk away from that life. I mean, I did betray my oath by just walking away. My father disowned me at that point. My boss, Persico, immediate hit on me, and so I had a lot of trouble. And you know, I won't get into all the details, but I mean, this poor girl, every time I walked out of the house, she was afraid I wasn't coming home. We didn't have cell phones, we had beepers. She used to beep me. I had to run to a payphone. Honey, I'm okay. You know, it was that kind of, it was very, very tough. I had a tough time earning money. It was tough. And after 13 months, like a fool, I fall into a trap. I violate my parole. Government had it with me because they tried to get me to testify against the boss of New Jersey, who was a good friend of mine, John Riggi. And they tried to put me in a trap to testify against him, and I refused. Well, within 10 days, I was violated on my parole. And they said, Franzese, we're done with you. We don't want you to cooperate. What happened? I was walking out of a bank in Brentwood, California, 15 agents. It was you thought I was robbing the bank. I mean, they went into the bank like I was holding it up. I was just walking out. I made my deposit or whatever. Threw me in a paddy wagon, drove my car away, went to the house with a search warrant, cleaned us out. I mean, just took everything we had. Franzese, we're done with you. We don't want you to cooperate anymore. We violated your parole. We're indicting you for murder. You'll never see the street again. You're done. They told her, your husband will never see the light of day again.
So what was that date?
That was November 13th, 1991.
All right, so they put you in the hole of holes, and you hit the wall of despair.
They put me in a hole, and they were going to transport me back I was in LA, federal jail at LA, and they would transport me back to Brooklyn in the morning where my case was. And Dr. J, I'll be honest with you, you know, it was just without a doubt the worst night of my life because I said, I'm done. I said, she's 27 years old. She waited for me 5 years, 13 months on parole. We got 2 little babies now. How's she going to wait for me now? I'm going to lose the girl I did all of this for. I said, they can't put me out in the yard. I got everybody looking to hurt me. I got enemies on both sides. I said, I'm going to spend the rest of my life in this 6x8 cell. At the age of 39, I'm done. It's over. You know, I always say this, you know, you can call me a coward or weak or whatever at that moment, but I'll tell you how bad it was. I used to demean people that were suicidal. I said, they're weak. How do they not face up to their troubles? After that night, I don't do that anymore. I mean, I wasn't suicidal. I wasn't that brave. But honestly, I wanted to lay my head on that cot, and I couldn't. It was too painful to think of what my life was all about. I was devastated.
So you wanted your life to end. And a security guard walks by and says, Mike, you don't look so good.
God walked by a CO, and he opened the slot on the door, and he said, Franzese, you okay? You don't look good. And I said, get away from me. I don't want to see any of you guys tonight. Leave me alone. I chased him. And he left. And he comes back maybe a minute later, and he pushes something through the slot on the door. And it falls on the floor, and I hear like a thump. And I was kind of groggy, and I looked down, and it was a Bible. I got mad. I said, I don't want a Bible. I want a bottle of Prozac or something at this point. And you know, honestly, I mean, I can relive, it's so vivid in my mind because when things like that happen to you, you don't forget. And I'm looking down at that Bible, I'm getting so angry, you know, like feeling sorry for myself. You know, God is nonsense. Look at me. I jumped off the cot, I picked up the Bible, and I slammed it against that cinder block wall as hard as I could. I mean, everything came out of me. And then, you know, it took me about a minute, and I think it was the Holy Spirit. I didn't know that then, but I said, you know what? I got nothing but enemies. I believed in God. I said, I don't need another enemy, you know? And I picked up the book. It was only me and God in that cell. And I looked up at that cement ceiling, and I said, you know, if you're really up there, you need to give me something to make me feel better. I can't deal with this. I need help. I had never read the Bible. Never. You know, in Catholic school, we read the catechism all the time. I never really read the Bible. And so I opened it up, and I didn't know where to begin. It just falls open to the book of Proverbs. I don't think that was a coincidence because, you know, I'm a very cynical guy. I think in terms of evidence. That's how I think. I mean, I've been to trial 5 times. I defended my dad 4 times. I think in terms of evidence. You know, you have to prove things to me. I'm not an easy guy to convince when I'm paying attention. And I start reading Proverbs, and I said, man, this guy is brilliant. You know, I said, wow, this is a smart guy right here. And it's starting to just got me distracted from the mess that I was in. And I'm reading through it, and all of a sudden I came to a verse. It just stopped me cold. And it was Proverbs 16:7. And it says, when a man's ways are pleasing to the Lord, even his enemies are at peace with him. And what happened is the enemies verse got me, because I had nothing but enemies. And then it was kind of like, I don't know if I finally faced myself and I said, have you always been pleasing to the Lord? Like, who are you kidding? This is not real with you. And I convicted myself, or the Holy Spirit convicted me. I don't know what it was, but it started to make me think. And I just started to read on. And I read through Proverbs that night, and I came to another verse that it's the verse of my life. And it was Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 and 6. And it says, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. In all of your ways acknowledge him. And this is the one. He will make your path straight. When I read that verse, I kind of challenged God at that point. I said, God, stop. I said, I trusted my father my whole life. Look where it got me. I said, I took a blood oath. Look where it got me. I said, now I got to buy into this. I mean, in my own Brooklynese words, this is what I was saying. And I said, you know what? Prove it to me. As you got to show me. Well, they told me I was going to spend the rest of my life in that cell. They were going to indict me. And fortunately, they tried to put another racketeering case on me, and it fell apart. They were never able to indict me. But they gave me the maximum. They gave me 4 years on the parole violation. So I spent 35 more months and 13 days in prison, 29 months and 7 days in that hole. 6x8 cell, 24/7, me and God. And I want to tell you this, that's not easy. We were not meant to be solo creatures. We were meant to be social. Those lights went out at night. I heard a lot of screaming, moaning, a lot of stuff that I encountered during that life. But what I did, I dove into that Bible. I was looking for the evidence. And I had her, I said, look, I got nothing but time on my hands. Send me books. I want to read about every faith. I had the prison library. I started reading about every faith. And I had a Sony Walkman. Now, these young kids don't know what that is, but we understand what that is. And that was my contact with the outside world. And I discovered Pastor Greg Laurie. Who now became a dear friend, but I used to listen to Pastor Greg, and the way he interpreted Scripture for me as I was doing my own study was so helpful. And I did a very valid comparison over a 3-year period of time. And I came out of there believing that the Bible was God's word and that Jesus was my Savior. And, one way I approach this, and I think this is very important because I talk to a lot of men. I speak at a lot of different groups. And when I started to look at Jesus, I said, you know what? This is Jesus of Nazareth. He was a man. He walked the face of the earth. He laughed, he cried, he bled. He was a man. From the time I was a kid, my father drummed it into my head. You got to be a man's man. That's the standard in life you have to live up to. You walk down the street, people got to respect you, respect women. You got to be a man's man. When I came into the life, that's all I ever heard. We're men of men. We're men of honor. I used to look up to some of the guys that I thought were really men. My dad, Tony Salerno, who was the boss of the Genovese family, he and I were close. And I really respected these guys. So when I looked at Jesus, my first reaction was, well, let me see what kind of man he is. And I studied the Bibles, forgetting I separated his deity from his manhood, and I started to look at Jesus the man. And look, I was blown away by his qualities of manhood. Everything about him, his wisdom, his courage, his strength, what he taught, he was brilliant to me. And he was somebody I said, this is somebody I want to emulate. And then realizing through my search of the evidence that he was absolutely crucified and he absolutely rose from the dead. And I can get into all the reasons why I believe that, which we can't do obviously now. So I looked at it and I said, okay, wait a minute. Here's the deal. Jesus is the ultimate man's man, the only man's man. So if I try to emulate Jesus throughout my life, okay, I'm going to be a better person. I'm going to be a better husband to my wife. I'm going to be a better father to my children. If I'm a boss, I'm going to treat my employees well. If I'm an employee, I'm going to give my boss an honest day's work. Everything about me is going to be better. Everybody in the community I come in contact with is going to be benefited from that, and I'm going to benefit. And when I die, well, if he's not the Savior of the world, well, I'm dead anyway, so what did I have to lose? But throughout my life, I benefited from emulating this man. So that's how I looked at it. That's what was my rationalization. I said, so I'm going to try to do what Jesus would like me to do. You know, what would Jesus do? That famous thing. Now, I fail miserably. I do at times, because I'm going to be honest with you. You know, I didn't get a lobotomy when I came to Christ. Every time I go to a gas station, I want to rob the gas station, okay? Especially out in California, because it's $4 and change a gallon. I'm saying, and every time I look at a pump, I'm saying, these people are telling me this is premium when I know they put the same darn gas and everything, because that's what we did, right? You know, you're in a constant battle, but, you know, I always say this, you must be held accountable in life. Jesus, number one, holds me accountable. My wife holds me accountable. My kids hold me accountable. People, friends of mine that are brothers in Christ, hold me accountable. You got to have that accountability. I tell these young gangbangers that I speak to all the time, you know, I tell them two things. Don't tell me you can't leave your gang. I left the biggest gang in the world. There's a way through Christ. That's number one. Number two, I tell them, you are who you hang out with in this world. You hang with the wrong crowd, you're going to be known to be the wrong type of person, and of course they're going to influence you. You must surround yourself with the right people. You know, and that's the ticket for me. I've surrounded myself with the right people. I love the Lord for what He is and what He's done in my life. And you know, can I just drive this home? I want people to understand something. I don't take credit for any of this, because I had no plan to be what I am now. If you would have said to me 25 years ago, you're going to be talking about Jesus, I would say, you're out of your mind. I had no plan whatsoever at all. It's just the way it happened, it happened. I told you this at lunch. But when I walked away from that life in 1995, everybody predicted my death, everybody. And there's no blueprint from walking away from the mob publicly like I did. As a matter of fact, I don't know anybody that's ever done that publicly. Went through the witness protection program, stuff like that, yes. But when I walked away, Life magazine, quote, if he holds to what he has promised, will mark the first time a high-ranking member of the Mafia will publicly walk away from his past and live. Ed McDonald, head of the organized crime strike force, he went on national TV in 1995. When I was released from prison, he said, quote, I wouldn't want to be in Michael Franzese's shoes. I don't think his life expectancy is very substantial. He was very diplomatic, you know, predicting my death. The FBI agent, one of them in my case, he followed him to that podium and he said straight out, Michael Franzese will get whacked. That's it. That was in 95. 1975, Halloween night, I walked into a room with 5 other gentlemen. Today, I'm the only one alive. The other 5 were all murdered. We had a big war in our family, 91 to 93. And I'll tell you this, she doesn't even know this, okay, because I don't tell my wife anything, honestly. Whatever she knows about me, she knows the way you people know. She don't read my books. She doesn't watch any of my documentaries. She turns it off. She don't want to know. Can I tell this quick story?
Sure, go ahead. We might as well. You've been telling a story for 30
We go
minutes.
see Goodfellas. I get out of prison. We go see Goodfellas. I say, honey, come on. You know, it's nostalgic. I knew all those guys. Let's see Goodfellas. She says, okay. We get in there, and I love popcorn in a movie, right? And she'll tell you, I always buy a big popcorn, and I get my refill, and I give that to her because I like to eat my popcorn alone. So I'm eating. She takes 4 bites, and she's done. I'm eating, and I realize I made a mistake. I don't know if you saw Goodfellas. Very graphic, right? And I'm eating my popcorn. I'm getting a little bit nervous. And at one point in time, she looks at me, and she said, is this what your life was really all about? I mean, you really did these things? And I said, honey, it's a movie. It's Hollywood. They make things up. Watch the movie, right? No sooner I say that than that scene comes on, and there's Michael Franzese, and she looks at me and says, come on, honey, let's go, right? And we left, right? And I said, that wasn't me. It's some guy by the name. So she goes online, looks it up, and Michael Franzese, and there's a mugshot of me from Goodfellas. Anyway, just before I got violated, my dad had called me. He was out on parole. And he said to me, the family is going to war. Stop the nonsense. We need you back here. And I'll be honest with you, I was so troubled by that. I said, man, what kind of guy am I? I'm leaving my men back there, and the family's going to war. I'm on parole. I'm going to break my parole if I go back, but what kind of man am I if I abandon my guys at a time of need? Because it was a power thing. And the guy that was trying to get Persico's power, I was loyal to him, was somebody I really didn't like. And I said, I can't let him do this. I had made up my mind to go back. I was going to break my parole. I wasn't going to tell her. 2 days before that, I get violated. And they throw me in a jail cell. And I'm in jail the whole time of the war. And during that war, 13 men were killed. 29 guys went to jail for life. And poor Michael is sitting in the hole that I believe until today that God saved my life at that point in time. I really do. I can't see it any other way because I made up my mind to go. And just to continue that, when that Life magazine article came out in 1986, 50 biggest and most powerful mob boss, they featured 6 of us. I was one of the 6. And they actually had a chart with the 50 of us on there, according to rank and wealth. And I was number 18, the youngest guy on the list. I was 5 behind my friend Gotti at the time. He wasn't boss yet. He was number 13. And I always say, people, don't ask me how they make a list like that. They didn't ask for our tax returns. Don't ask me how they got it. It was a silly list. But I'll tell you what's not silly about that list. Out of that list of 50, 33 years later, 49 of them are dead. 49 are dead over a 33-year period. And I'm here, I believe, for one reason and one reason only, because God had a different plan and a purpose for my life. And he's made that evident to me over the past 23 years. And
let me speak into that for a second. The second imprisonment was, I think you'd gotten the Savior part of Jesus around the baptism time and the wedding time. But in that second imprisonment, when you hit the wall of despair, God commenced to work in your life in which you were in solitary confinement for 29 months. You put the Bible on trial with all your legal expertise, and you became totally convinced of the veracity of the Bible and that Jesus he is the man's man. He is the made man.
yes,
And at that point, you had gone from your earthly father controlling you to the Godfather controlling you, and now God the Father is your boss.
yes.
And your life is in a place of surrender. And after that, all of this you're describing, speaking to thousands of people, et cetera, all that opened up.
Yes, and another important thing, my earthly father had such a tremendous hold on me that I'll describe this, one of the horrors of that life, and it really is a horror of that life, you make a mistake, your best friend walks you into a room, you don't walk out again. And unfortunately, I witnessed that throughout my time in that life. Well, I got that call one time. Being honest, in that life, I was one of the younger guys, and there was envy because I was making, more money than most of the guys there, a lot of the old timers. And so there was a story that was written in Newsday that I was becoming powerful enough to break away from the Colombos and start my own family. It was a fiction, it could have been made into a fiction movie. There was no truth to it whatsoever. But it started to get into people's heads. And my dad was out on parole and called me one day, so we got to go see the boss. He sent for us. And being that my dad was on parole, and even though I had all those arrests and I was never convicted, so he was able to stay with me, I would drive him everywhere. So I said, okay, what time you want to go? He said, no, they want to do this differently. They want me to come in first. They want you to come in second. Now, we were both captains at that point. He was a captain. I was a captain. I said, Dad, why are we going to separate? I said, the talk on the street? I said, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to go together. It was the first time I had a real disagreement with my dad, and we were of equal rank. Back and forth, back and forth. My dad always, no, we got an order, we got to obey the order. I'm saying, but Dad, you hear what's going on? If there's going to be a problem, let's go together. Back and forth. Finally, I threw my hands up. I said, I've been listening to you all my life. I don't like this, but if that's what you want, fine. So I leave. I get another call from another captain, Jimmy Angelina. He says, meet me in Brooklyn. It was a late meeting, and we had to be covert because the boss was on parole at the time, so we had to be very careful because he would have been violated. So I dropped my car off. I get in the car with him. I knew this guy all my life. There's a guy sitting behind me. I'm in the passenger seat who I didn't really recognize. I'm saying, why is this guy here, And as I'm driving with Jimmy, I'm waiting for him to tell me what this meeting is about. Well, he don't say anything. He starts talking to me about the Yankees. Now, I'm a diehard Yankee fan. I don't want to hear about the Yankees that night. I'm waiting for him to give me a clue as to what we're doing. He don't say a word. I got this guy sitting behind me. I'm saying, something's wrong here. It don't look good. So we get out of the car, and it was about a 30-yard walk from the car to the basement apartment where we were meeting. It was somebody's house, private. As I'm walking, it was a summer night, and I can tell you, I started to get very nervous because I'm assuming now, I don't look back, but I'm assuming Jimmy's behind me and the other guy's behind him. I'm saying, this is a bad setup. I can remember that night so vividly. When I talk about it, I can remember the aroma of the flowers. I can hear the crickets talking that night because my senses got so high. I said, I'm going to walk in this house and the door's gone, I'm going to get killed. I said, this is it. And people have said to me, well, Michael, why didn't you run? You know, it wasn't heroic. It was robotic. I said, well, this is it. This is it. It's like I just said, okay. And my knees started getting weak. I was starting to get very scared. And he opens the door. I don't know how I didn't faint when the door opened, I'll be honest with you. Until today, I don't know what kept me standing. And obviously, I'm here. So we had a whole big thing. And I started to get mad when they accused me of, because they said that the newspaper came out and said I made $2 billion or some ridiculous number. And I said, look, come on, it was $1.5 billion. I'm only kidding. It was some ridiculous number. And I said, you know what? I said, I was turning in $2 million a week at that point. It was my whole scheme. And I'm saying, you guys have the nerve to be upset with me. I started to get a little irritated with the boss. Now, you don't do that because from right, you go to wrong immediately. So I held myself. Everything was done. We finished. I had hugs, have a glass of wine. I just wanted out of there. So I told Jimmy, I said, Jimmy, drive me back to my car. I got to go out to Long Island. I got a long ride. Now we get in the car, it's just me and Jimmy. And I know him all my life. And I was so angry at him that he didn't prepare me. I looked at him. I was about to blast him, verbally blast him, right? And I always have to be careful with my words. But he looks at me and he says, stop. Before you say something, stop. I said, what? He said, I got to be honest with you, Mike. It was a problem for you tonight. He said, you held yourself pretty good. I said, now I got even more mad. I said, you know that? I know you my entire life. You know I'm walking into a possible trap. You welcome me in. You don't tell me? And he looks at me and he said, if it was the other way around, would you have told me? And I thought about it for a second and I said, no. And he said, it's the life we lead. He said, you know it better than anybody. You grew up in it. And man, you know, for some reason, it just struck me. I said, what the heck is this? It's my good friend. But then we drive back to where my car is, and it gets worse. I go to get out of the car, and he grabs me by my arm, and he says, I want to tell you something. He said, you're not going to like this, but I'm your friend, and I'm telling you the truth. You could take this to the bank. Those are his exact words. My father wasn't in there when I got in there. He said, your father wasn't in there, or your father was in there before you tonight. He didn't help you one bit, Michael. He threw you under the bus. And I said, what? I was so stunned, I couldn't respond to him. And I get out of the car, and I'm starting to walk back to my car, and I'm saying, what could he have done? But knowing my father so well, you know what he did? He said, if my son is stealing money, I don't know. He does everything. I'm on parole. He handles it all. You got to go to him. He didn't stick up for me. And he had juice, my dad. He could have said, what are you kidding me? My son would never do this. He just threw me under the bus. And man, I'll tell you what, you know, I said, man, if this life can separate father and son, what do we really have here? I'll tell you why this was so significant. I believe that, I know it for a fact now, that God used that time to break the hold my dad had on me. Because if that incident don't happen, regardless, I would have never walked away from the life. And I made that decision later on to walk away, but that never left me. So I realized that God, I had such the mob mentality and such a hold that my dad had on me, that hold had to be broken. So that hold was broken at that point, and then he had to be able to penetrate me during that time on the hold, because if I was on the street, forget about it, if I would have got killed in the war or something would have happened, but if I was on the street, I could have never turned to him because I was too much a product of my own self, and I always can handle everything. She'll tell you, my famous word, don't worry about it, I got it covered. Even when I don't have it covered, I say, don't worry about it. True. And so I always thought that I can handle everything, and God had to show me, no, you can't. You can't.
Well, you're now at a place where you come, in a sense, full circle. You started out under the power and control of your earthly father. Then you moved to the Godfather. And now you're solidly in the hands of God the Father. Over that 10 to 12-year period that God broke you down, now you're at a place where that word surrender that her mom and she mentioned to you, that's real to you.
Yes.
And it's kind of like, here's what I see. In having studied your books, and if you want the full detail of all that he's talking about, where you have a book table out in the lobby and you can get these books and you can read this because we're just skipping over so much of it. But here's what I see happen, Michael. in your early life, on your God screen, God was there was an outline of God, but it was just dots, vague. Then you got into the Mafia, and God left the screen altogether. God was out of the picture.
That's right.
Then you met Cammie, God comes back into the picture, but it's black and white. Then you get thrown in the hole, and you spend 29 months with God dealing with you dealing with God, reading the Bible, and it went from black and white to color, where now you see God in clear color with perfect clarity, and your life is fully surrendered in His hands.
Yes.
Is that fair?
It is very fair. And, you know, I try to look back. I don't create a story for myself. I try to look back and see how God had a hand in this. It's like when I meet her. She wasn't the first beautiful woman I met in my life, but there was something about her. When I met her, it was never on my radar screen to walk away from that life. It wasn't even a thought. You don't even think about something like that. But for some reason, my love for her is becoming more powerful than this lifelong bond, this love I had for my dad. It became more powerful than this blood oath that I took. And how do you explain that? You know, I don't know how to explain that. I wasn't looking for anything. It was just her. She don't come into my life, I'm dead or in prison for the rest of my life. There's no doubt about it. 1,000%. I realize that. And you know, the way this just progressed for me, you know, I'll tell you how strongly my belief is. And I have a hard time saying that. I get a little emotional when I say it. But, you know, there is a saying that the sins of the father fall on the children. And I've always said, you know what, God, don't do that to me. You know, I have 7 kids. I love my kids. We've been so blessed. Don't do that to me. And He's honored that in a big way. But even if that were to happen, I might get angry with God. I don't know what I would do, but I can never disbelieve Him. It's too strong. It's too powerful to me, not only in my life, but in the lives of others that I've been blessed to witness over the past 23 years. God has a transforming power in your life if you give it up to Him. There's no other explanation, you know, the reason why I'm walking so freely. People can't believe that. Yeah. You know, they just, and to a great degree, I don't get it.
Well, let's conclude with this point. When you met Jesus and it went from black and white to color, when that connection was made, that's when all of the death of the Mafia went away. And when the images of your father and the godfather and all that stuff, all that was displaced, and Jesus took front and center in your life, that's when you became fully alive. And that's when you became all that God has created you to be, and He has kept you alive to speak about it.
Amen.
No doubt about it. I mean, I can't explain it any other way. You know, and even that night, you know, when I walked away, what God made me realize, He said, I've prepared you. You can face death, because I faced it at one point in time. And, you know, when I walked away, I said, well, how's this going to happen, man? These guys are not going to let me go. And I said, okay, they're not going to walk me in a room. They're going to have to work to get me. I'll move out to California. You know, I changed my whole lifestyle. She'll tell you. I didn't walk my dog at 7 in the morning. I didn't create a pattern in my life. We didn't go to the same restaurant every Tuesday night in case guys were looking for me. They had nowhere to go. I didn't put a house in my name, no utilities. I was very disciplined in that regard because I knew the methodology. God prepared me. He says, you know exactly what they're going to do. I prepared you for all of this because I have a different plan for you. And so it wasn't like He just threw me in the fire and said, oh, I'm going to make you a preacher and you're going to, no. I was prepared for quite a while for this, and I believe that. And when I said to you, you know, and again, not making excuses, that I didn't feel good about things that I was doing, I think God saw something in my heart and said, all right, I could work with this guy. That's how I, you know, on my own terms, break it down. And, you know, and look, I am by no way a perfect Christian. You know, I have my times, you know, sometimes the mob stuff comes back into my head. You know, my wife will tell you, but I love the Lord for what He's done in my life. And my commitment is now to let others understand the transforming power of Jesus Christ. And that's why I work a lot with these gangbangers. I go into prisons all the time. And, you know, it's amazing. I always say the best thing that happened in my ministry is The Sopranos being in everybody's living room for the last 10 years. When I first started speaking, every church we go to, I'm not kidding, we have the best attendance, you know, to Easter.
Not because they knew who I was. The mob guy is here. People came to see the mobster. No, that was it. Because this now, with the Irishmen out there, it's peaking again. I mean, they're starting all over again. So I always say God is brilliant. He knows how to get people in the door. And then it's up to the Holy Spirit to do his work. You know, I want to tell you people this. I have never seen God in a dream. And he's never spoken to me audibly. I don't have that gift. Some people do. I don't have that gift. But I know the Holy Spirit speaks to my heart because I have a relationship with him. My connection to the Holy Spirit is on the stage. Because there are times when I say things that I have no idea that were going to come into my head or my mouth, and people will come up to me afterwards and say, Michael, I really needed to hear that tonight. I've been struggling so much, I really needed to hear that. Because you become a vehicle, you know, and that's what happens. And that's what keeps me going, because I see that it has an impact on people. And as long as God allows me to do it, I'll do it.
Well, a few minutes ago, I mentioned that you guys were a study in extremes. You evolve through this process that we've detailed tonight into a place of faith where now you've surrendered your life to God and God is in control. For you, Cammie, you came into all of this with faith. Mm-hmm. But through it all, it served as a refiner's fire to strengthen you and to also bring you to a place of deep and profound trust and conviction. So you're both at a place of trust and surrender to the Lord, but you came from two totally different angles to get there. That true?
True.
Anything else you want to say?
No, I think he said it all.
Well, I want to say this. This is very significant. I'm trying to bring out the things that impacted me so much. She's a lot better person than I am, number one, because for her, I did what I did. She got thrown into all of this. And, you know, for her to stand by me and to do what she's done through all my stuff, which was immense, and for her mom had a tremendous influence on me. Her mom died of cancer in 2012. And we were taking care of her at the time. And she was doing her chemo treatments. And me, I'm going to cure your mother too. Don't worry about it. I got her on 30 different homeopathic things. Doctors all over the world. I got everything taken care of, right? Me. And so her mom is starting to reject all the pills and everything that we're giving her. She's starting to reject the food. She's crying every night because she's so close to her mom. All the kids are crying. So I'm taking her to UCLA. She had lost her hair. She got the bandana on her head. And I got her in my car. And I'm saying, Mom, what's up with you, man? I said, we're trying to help you. You're starting to reject the medication. Cammie's crying every night. I said, I'm very upset with you. And she turns to me just like this. And she looks at me. And I'm not kidding. She had a glow, just a glow on her face. And she said, Michael, I'm going home. I'm ready to go home. What got me, there wasn't one hint of fear in that woman. She was so sure in her relationship with the Lord. And knowing how she lived her life, I said, this is real. There's no question about it in my mind. There was another thought in my life, another thing that God put in my life to assure me. She died 2 weeks later. Not a hint of fear. That was the most courageous thing I've ever witnessed in my life. And I'm coming from the street. I've seen a lot of stuff. The most courageous, not one, Dr. J, not even, no doubt, no fear, nothing. And I said, wow, this is so powerful. So between these two women, you know, look, I'm thankful to God every day. I really am, because I know it should have been a lot worse for me.
All right, well, I hate to end our time together, but we need to stop. Let's do this. It's our tradition at these dinners that when we finish, we give the speaker a chance to pray for you. So what we're going to do is have a brief word of prayer. If there's anything you want to say before you pray, you can say it.
No,
Then I want you to lead us in prayer. We'll have a moment of silence, and then I'll close in prayer.
Okay.
You want to say before you pray?
No, I want to thank Brian. He was our host and picked us up, and everybody's been so nice here and courteous and cordial. So I appreciate that. We always appreciate the opportunity of being able to come and share. So I thank you all for that, and thank you for the great turnout. I mean, it's important, and I pray that next year it's even better than this. So we hope for that, and that's really it.
I want you to lead us in prayer. Let's all pray together.
You know, dear Lord, I just want to thank you for bringing us all together, Lord. I appreciate everybody that's come here tonight. And I'm praying, Lord, that the Holy Spirit, was able to touch some hearts here, plant some seeds through the testimony that you've given to me to share. And Lord, I don't know anybody in here, but I know some people have heavy hearts. Some people are struggling with something in their life. I just want them to understand that your doors are always open, Lord, that the ground at the foot of the cross is level no matter what people have done in their life, that you are a merciful, forgiving, and loving God. And I ask that you come into their hearts, Lord, that you lead them in the right direction, Lord. We never try to impose you on anyone, Lord, but we try to open the door so that people can see, through somebody like me and through the many testimonies that you have throughout the history of the world, that you are real and that you are there with open arms waiting for everybody, Lord. So I thank you again. I ask you to bless everybody in this room. Bless their travels home tonight. Bless their families, Lord, and really point them in the right direction, Lord. Let them understand that you are the answer to not only everything here on earth, but to happiness in all of eternity. And we do this always in Jesus' holy name. Amen.
Let's just have a moment of silence, and if there's anything you that are here want to say to God, we want to give you a moment of silence to do that. So why don't you turn your attention to the Lord, and whatever's on your heart, maybe you express that to him privately. Lord, we want to thank you tonight for your presence here among us in power. We have felt and witnessed a power that's beyond us, beyond anything human. And we want you to know, Lord, that we're forever grateful for the way you have not left us at the mercy of our sin nature, our need to control, our tendency to distrust, which went to extremes in Michael's life, and he took the lifestyle that he did. But you rescue us from ourselves. And Jesus He is the essence of all that is true, honorable, good, noble, virtuous, perfect, and holy. He is a man's man. He is the answer to our every need. And no matter what our questions are, we always can find our answer in him. What an amazing realization to know and understand these things and to see it work out in a person's life, and to take him from literally the pit of hell to the pinnacle of peace and forgiveness and a resignation of joy in his life. It's an amazing thing. Thank you for everyone here tonight, Lord. We trust that you've spoken to each of us in some way. And as we leave this event tonight, Lord, let there be resolve in all of our hearts, not to see you vaguely, but to see you live and in color, and to clearly understand how it is that our souls are restless, and they will be restless until we find our rest in you. Thank you for your presence here tonight, Lord. It's been wonderful. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Let's give these guys a round of applause. Thank you so much.
Thank you.